Across America, city streets erupt with protests over U.S. military aid to Israel. Demonstrators wave Palestinian flags, demanding an end to funding and accountability for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Counter-protesters rally nearby, insisting that aid is vital for Israel's security and America's interests. These dueling crowds reflect a nation deeply divided, with public squares turning into battlegrounds of ideology. The debate spills into Congress, where lawmakers face mounting pressure from constituents and lobbyists. Progressive Democrats now openly challenge the status quo, demanding conditions on aid and questioning if U.S. weapons violate international law. This marks a generational shift, forcing a conversation long avoided in Washington. The issue is no longer just foreign policy, it's about America's identity, values, and global responsibilities. As images of destruction in Gaza and grief on both sides fill the news, Americans confront the real consequences of their government's choices. The debate over aid to Israel has become a proxy for defining what kind of nation America wants to be. To understand the debate, consider the scale. The U.S. pledges $38 billion in military aid to Israel over a decade, about $3.8 billion each year. Most of this is foreign military financing, funds for Israel to buy advanced U.S. weapons and technology. Another $500 million annually supports missile defense, including the Iron Dome. Unlike most foreign aid, Israel's funding is locked in by a multi-year agreement, giving it rare predictability. This ensures Israel can plan its defense with certainty and access America's most sophisticated military tech. The recent Gaza conflict triggered calls for even more emergency aid, igniting fierce debate in Congress. Critics question whether more weapons fuel conflict or undermine U.S. values and international law. The conversation has shifted. It's not just about supporting Israel, but about how and under what conditions. Lawmakers, activists, and voters now demand oversight and accountability. The structure and purpose of U.S. aid to Israel are under more scrutiny than ever before. This marks a turning point in one of America's most enduring alliances. The U.S.-Israel alliance began in 1948 when President Truman recognized Israel just minutes after its declaration of independence. This bold move was controversial, risking U.S. relations with Arab nations and access to oil. Early support was mostly diplomatic and economic, driven by post-Holocaust sentiment and a sense of moral obligation. The U.S. provided loans and grants to help Israel build its economy and absorb immigrants, while maintaining an arms embargo in hopes of avoiding regional conflict. Through the 1950s and early 1960s, America balanced support for Israel with ties to key Arab states, wary of Soviet influence. France, not the U.S., was Israel's main arms supplier during this period. The relationship was friendly but cautious, not yet the special relationship it would become. The turning point came before the 1967 Six-Day War, when the U.S. began selling advanced weapons to Israel. Israel's swift victory in 1967 transformed perceptions, showing it as a formidable military power and valuable Cold War ally. This marked the start of a deeper, more strategic partnership. The foundation for today's alliance was set. The 1973 Yom Kippur War was a watershed moment. When Israel faced defeat, President Nixon launched a massive airlift of U.S. military supplies, helping Israel turn the tide. This crisis convinced Washington that Israel's survival required direct, robust military support. U.S. aid shifted from economic to military grants, making Israel a key Cold War partner against Soviet-backed Arab states. The 1978 Camp David Accords, brokered by President Carter, cemented this alliance. Israel and Egypt made peace, each rewarded with major U.S. aid packages, military for Israel, economic and military for Egypt. Aid became a tool for both war and peace, institutionalizing U.S. military support for Israel. By the 1980s, aid was entirely in grants, not loans, solidifying the financial relationship we see today. Billions in annual military aid became a fixture of U.S. foreign policy. The wars and peace deals of the 1970s forged a deeper, more militarized alliance. This era set the stage for the modern U.S.-Israel relationship. Central to U.S. aid is the Qualitative Military Edge, or QME, a legal commitment to ensure Israel's military superiority over any regional threat. This policy shapes every U.S. arms sale in the Middle East. When America sells advanced weapons to Arab states, it offsets the balance by giving Israel even more advanced technology. For example, Israel's F-35 jets come with unique modifications to maintain its edge. The $3.8 billion annual aid package is calculated to fund these high-tech systems, from fighter jets to missile defense. The U.S. also shares intelligence, conducts joint exercises, and collaborates on research, integrating Israel's military with America's. Supporters say QME deters war and gives Israel confidence to pursue peace. Critics argue it fuels an arms race and discourages diplomatic solutions, making military options too easy. The QME debate is at the heart of the larger discussion about U.S. aid. It's a balancing act between security, stability, and the risk of perpetual conflict. The policy remains a cornerstone of the alliance. U.S. aid to Israel is a tightly managed process. Most of the $3.8 billion is deposited at the Federal Reserve, then used by Israel to buy American-made weapons and services. This system supports U.S. defense jobs and explains why the aid enjoys bipartisan support in Congress. For years, Israel could spend some aid on its own defense industry, but this is being phased out. By 2028, all aid must be spent on U.S. products. An additional $500 million funds joint missile defense projects like Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow. These programs benefit both countries. Israel gets protection, while the U.S. gains valuable data and tech advances. Emergency aid can supplement the annual package as seen after recent conflicts. Such requests spark heated debate in Congress, forcing lawmakers to publicly justify more aid during crises. Supporters frame it as essential for Israel's immediate defense and regional stability. The mechanics of aid are as much about U.S. interests as Israel's security. The process is now under more scrutiny than ever. Once a bipartisan given, U.S. aid to Israel now faces growing scrutiny. Progressive lawmakers and activists demand oversight, questioning whether unconditional aid aligns with American values. Social media and grassroots movements amplify Palestinian voices, pressuring politicians to reconsider old policies. Younger voters, less tied to Cold War logic, focus on human rights and justice. For the first time, Congress debates bills to condition or investigate aid, forcing lawmakers to take public stands. Policy experts and human rights groups argue that unconditional support undermines peace and a two-state solution. The future of U.S. aid is now a subject of real contentious debate. The debate over U.S. aid to Israel is now front and center in American politics. Supporters argue that Israel is a vital democratic ally, essential for U.S. security and regional stability. They highlight intelligence sharing, military cooperation, and shared values as reasons to maintain strong aid. Pro-Israel groups lobby hard, warning that any wavering would embolden America's enemies. Critics counter that unconditional aid makes the U.S. complicit in human rights abuses and undermines its own values. They point to civilian casualties in Gaza, settlement expansion, and the blockade as policies enabled by U.S. support. Human rights organizations and progressive groups demand that aid be conditioned on Israel's adherence to international law. Critics argue that a blank check removes incentives for peace and a two-state solution. Lawmakers increasingly call for guardrails, insisting U.S. weapons not be used for annexation or settlement expansion. This perspective is gaining ground, especially among younger Americans and Democrats. The political landscape is shifting, and the debate is far from settled. U.S. support for Israel is rooted in history, strategy, and politics. What began as moral obligation after the Holocaust evolved into a Cold War partnership, and later, a military alliance cemented by peace deals. The qualitative military edge policy and billions in annual aid have institutionalized the relationship. The alliance also benefits the U.S. defense industry, creating powerful domestic support. But the consensus is fracturing. New generations demand accountability and conditions on aid. The debate is no longer about whether to support Israel, but how. Future aid may come with more strings attached, reflecting changing values and political realities. One thing is certain: America's relationship with Israel will remain a defining and debated feature of its foreign policy.